We are officially after the full 3.2 story, including the Afterstory, which means we finally have the full picture of what this patch was supposed to be and what it actually means going into 3.3. We already knew that 3.2 was going to be a lighter patch, so-called filler patch. That was not a surprise, I believe. But even with that in mind, some people still ended up disappointed with how some things turned out. And listen, I get that. There were definitely things here that simply did not work as I wanted it as well. But at the same time, I think 3.2 had a really good direction, because when I look at this patch, I see ideas, I see systems and storytelling elements that players have been asking for quite a long time, including me, by the way. And in my opinion, some of them actually feel like they were not originally planned for this patch. They feel like additions, especially when you compare the level of polish to other parts of the game. So in this video, I want to break it all down. What worked in 3.2, especially when it comes to the story, what did not work, how the main theme of this patch was handled, and how committed the developers actually were to the theme. We're also going to talk about the character-focused content, the role of the Whispers Between the Stars, and how the Afterstory is clearly setting up something much bigger in 3.3, which we also saw in the 3.3 trailer. Hello my little starlights, it's yours truly, Luminara here, and before we start, we are getting really close to 1 year on this channel and almost, listen to that, 4,000 subscribers, 4,000 starlights, which this is crazy, it's kind of crazy. So I was thinking about maybe doing Q&A. I was looking what people are doing for anniversaries, and a lot of people are doing Q&As. So if you have any questions about me, the channel, or what is coming next, leave them in the comments. I will also make a separate post about it soon. But as of now, grab your tea or coffee and let us get started, starlights. As a quick overview, when it comes to the main story of 3.2, it really focuses on two core elements: Sigrika as the featured character, and the main theme being university life and student struggles. And all of that is built around the solar celebration and plotting schemes of Fraxidus, which is a very natural progression of what happened in the previous main story quest, so the setting itself feels very natural and cohesive from the start. And before we even getting into the deeper narrative stuff, I have to mention, okay, the environment, because what they did with the celebration space was amazing. The level of detail, the interactive elements, the small things like playing with the balloons, like interacting with flashes, watching my rover dancing like a millennial. I had a blast. It made the world feel alive in a way that Wuthering Waves was often criticized for lacking. It simply worked well. A lot of adult gachas are using celebrations/festivals in their filler patches, and 3.2 was a filler patch, but I believe outside of the Lantern Ride from Genshin, this was the first time when I fully got the festive spirit. The only downside is that all of this disappears the moment you progress the story. I know it makes sense narratively, okay, because the celebration ends, but at the same time it feels like such a waste, because this is one of the best spaces they have created and you only experienced it for such a short time. I would prefer to, I don't know, maybe leave it for us until the Afterstory, but anyway. At the center of all of this, we have Sigrika. As a member of the Royal tribe and the future successor of the Heliotic Six, she is under constant pressure. She is seen as this miracle child, someone who achieved things much earlier than others, and because of that, she feels the need of constantly proving herself and to surpass expectations. And this is where the story starts tying everything together, because during the solar celebrations, we are introduced to Sigrika trying to solve mysterious riddles that lead us into the dark space, which at first seems like a normal part of the academy event introduced by Lucilla, some type of competition where the students solve puzzles and try to win. But very quickly, it becomes clear that something is wrong, because the dark space is unstable, and as we investigate, especially with the context from 3.1, we start to see connections to Fraxidus. And something much deeper. Inside this space, we encounter the White Rabbit, an entity that feeds on insecurity, stress, and fear, which, designed alongside the dark space itself, is a direct reference to the Alice in Wonderland. I really like how they approached this concept, because the dark space feels like a distorted reflections of reality. It takes the familiar elements of the academy and twists them into something unsettling, something chaotic, which very clearly mirrors the mental state of the characters, especially the students who are stuck between being a child and becoming an adult, dealings with expectations, pressure, and uncertainty. It is not a completely new concept, don't get me wrong, but the execution here, I believe, was strong, both visually and thematically. We have to admit that developers used everything they could to make the story as engaging as possible through visuals, characters, and interactive elements. At some point, I felt like they used everything we previously had since 1.0 and squished it into this short story, but surprisingly, it worked. But what was a highlight of all of this was how they handled a very delicate motifs like stress, anxiety, and becoming a young adult. As we mentioned, 3.2 was a filler patch, right? And usually with filler patches, we get something that is more focused either on specific character or a specific theme or additional world building. And in this case, Corey decided to focus on university life, on students, and what it actually means to become a young adult. What I really appreciate is that they did not just show the positive side of it. Yes, we have youth, we have excitement, we have the learning part, the feeling that everything is ahead of you, but at the same time, they fully committed to the other side of that experience. The stress, anxiety, burnout, the pressure to be more than enough. This is where the 3.2 becomes actually interesting, because those are not just like empty words used to sell this new shiny character that is the Sigrika. They are shown consistently through everything. We start in this bright, happy solar celebration, full of life, full of energy, people dancing, people enjoying themselves. We are having fun. But there, we start to notice cracks. The students who are not enjoying it as we do, students who are overwhelmed, and that contrast is the foundation of everything that comes next. We enter the dark space. The dark space actually feels like stepping in a fever dream that does not fully belongs to you. It is like a forgotten wonderland from a childhood. Beautiful, but unsettling. Gravity feels non-existent with all the chairs and desks floating around. Outside does not match reality. Instead, you see a space that seems to have a mind of its own. It feels like looking through a kaleidoscope made of someone else's mind. Everything is colorful, layered, constantly shifting, and at the same time, there's this weird discomfort in the back of your head telling you that something is off. We learn from Lucilla that this is a reflection. The dark space mirrors what it means to be a young person. On one side, there's excitement, endless possibilities, freedom, youth, the idea that you can become anything and everybody. And on the other side, there is fear, comparison, pressure, the overwhelming feeling that maybe you will not make it, that maybe you will choose wrong, that maybe you are not enough. And all of that exists at the same time in one space, just like in a real life. This is when I think the connection between this wonderlight dark space and the idea of growing up was pretty smart, because being a young adult feels exactly like that. It is fascinating, it is inspiring, but it's also so confusing and heavy and sometimes just too much. And the fact that the game managed to reflect that not only through dialogue but through environment design is amazing. But it does not stop there, because the developers pushed this theme even further through Sigrika. I think Her story is actually one of the strongest parts of this patch, because instead of showing us someone who struggles from the beginning and grows into the greatness, like for example it was with Linnea, they showed us the opposite. Someone who is seen as perfect, a golden child, quote unquote, a future successor of Heliotic 6, someone who, from the outside, looks like she has everything under control. She is talented, she is hardworking, she is kind and respected, the kind of person that makes you think, wow, it must be so easy for her, everyone likes her. And yet, the more we learn about her, the more we see the cost of that image. The pressure to maintain it, to constantly prove herself, to not just meet the expectations, but to surpass them again and again, and how exhausting and honestly self-destructive that becomes. And I totally understand that. Because when I decided to go to the university, I also decided to pursue art. I wanted to become a designer, and it was not really what my parents expected from me, okay? So from the very beginning, I felt like I had something to prove, like not just to myself, but to everyone around me, that I can make it. So I pushed myself. I wanted to show that I can not only make it, but I can be successful in it. And at some point, I was studying full-time, doing freelance work, and also working a part-time job as a designer. And at first, it felt amazing. I felt so powerful. But at some point, I was constantly overwhelmed. I was frustrated, and I felt like I was losing control. Even though I was the one putting all of the pressure on myself, it felt like the whole world was expecting it from me, that if I stop, I will fail. And that pushed me into a really, really dark place. So when I see Sigrika, when I see how much she is trying to hold everything together and still be quote unquote perfect on the outside, I get it. I think her story works so well. First of all, this is the contrast, for example, for the Linnea, and also because how believable it is presented. I think it is important to show those emotions are not limited to one type of person. It is not just the quote-unquote struggling ones. Anyone can feel like they're losing control under the pressure. But there are also some other things. This theme of being a student, of becoming a young adult, it's not only tied to the main story or the environmental design. The developers pushed it into the mini-games and events as well, because events are designed to relieve the stress. Yes, they are simple, they are light, they are relaxing, and I know some people might see that, oh my god, they're not engaging enough, you are just clicking, but that was the point. That was exactly the point. They're not supposed to stress you. They're supposed to give you a break. They're supposed to be small, easy, satisfying activities that let you breathe for a moment and give you the slight feeling of nostalgia of those games that we played when we were super little. When I look at the 3.2 as a whole, it is not only trying to sell me a story about a character that is currently on the banner, but it is telling me a story of a person struggling and overcoming the pressure. It is also trying to respond to it. It gives you heavy themes, but at the same time, it gives you a space to rest from them. Okay, I was super positive about the whole patch, especially Sigrika. I literally fell in love with her to the point I pulled for her and her signature weapon. Do not judge me, I did not expect that as well. But anyway, even though I was praising this patch a lot, there was one thing that I think was a step in a very good direction, but the execution made it wonky at best. And that is Whispers Between the Stars event. You know, this was actually something I was very, very excited about. I even mentioned it during my 3.2 livestream video because this is exactly the type of content players were waiting for. More interactions with the characters we met along the way. In this event, we have multiple characters from La Heroie, and each of them has a few smaller encounters, like little stories where we can spend time with them, have some fun, learn more things about them, and make them feel like actual part of the world. Yeah, and I really appreciate that because honestly, I feel Like something that maybe was not originally planned like this, but it was added later after player feedback, which again shows that the developers are listening. But maybe actually because of that, it has some issues. First of all, even though I like the idea of those smaller encounters, they felt repetitive, and the gameplay itself was not that engaging. It is fine with the first character, maybe even the second, but after that it starts to feel very boring because the structure is always the same. And at the same time, I am a little bit conflicted about the format itself. Because on one hand, I like that we are not getting one long hangout where suddenly we are best friends with the character. Instead, we have smaller interactions that build up over time, which feels more natural, right? We are meeting the person and we are spending the time over and over again, and then we are creating the bond. But on the other hand, it feels, I don't know, a bit flat in the execution. I mean, the stories themselves were actually nice. I liked that they were smaller, more grounded, not like another world-ending scenario. Helping Linnea, seeing her development, learning about Luke Herson and his cooking. Those were really charming moments, don't get me wrong. I genuinely enjoyed that. But at the same time, I feel like they could have done more with it. It feels like a really, really strong base for something bigger in the future. Not something fully developed yet, though. And I would love to see them expanded, especially by bringing back older characters, because we already know people loved that in the 3.1 with the huge event when we saw Jian and others. So the potential here is huge. There was also a really nice reward at the end. If you committed to all the hangouts, you got additional content with IMF, which I think was such a great touch. But now we have to talk about the main issue of this event, because this event was not fully optional. And this is where I have to agree with other people in the comments. At certain points in the main story, usually right after something important or emotional or like climatic, you are forced to stop and do parts of this event to continue. And you know, I understand the idea. It is supposed to show the passage of time in more natural way. Instead of just clicking 2 days later, you spend the time with people, you engage with the university, and that is actually a very good idea. But the problem is how it feels in practice, because instead of feeling natural, it feels like an interruption to the main progression. Like you're watching a movie, something important is happening, and suddenly you get an ad break, and now you have to watch it before continuing. I hate this feeling. Anyway, that is exactly how it felt sometimes, especially when the tone does not match. Like one moment you are dealing with something very serious, connecting to the dark space, to the story, to the Sigrika, there is tension, there are feelings, and the next moment you are helping someone find a cat or helping in additional project. So what are we doing? Are we in a critical moment of the story, or are we just like only chilling? I think that is exactly why some people started treating it like a chore. And honestly, it makes me a little bit mad, because this type of content was something players really wanted for a long time. I was waiting for it for a long time. More time with characters, more interactions outside of banners, and turning it something that feels forced instead of rewarding. Yeah, it takes away from it. I don't know, maybe because those additional interactions were so divided from the main plot. Like, for example, helping Mornier with finding the inspiration, I did not felt that. I'm sorry. So overall, I really appreciate what they started here. I think this is a great direction, and I really want to see more of it, but it needs more polish, better integration, and should never feel like a chore. So now let's talk about the Afterstory. After finishing the main story and everything tied to it, we got this additional part. And I think at this point we can clearly see the pattern Kuro is going for. The first part of the patch is fully focused on the main story, on the banner characters, on the big themes, on the world building. And then the after story work as a cooldown phase. It ties those smaller threads that did not get the closure. It gives a little bit more of the closure, and at the same time it is very clearly there to build a hype for what is coming next. And 3.2 did exactly that. We learned more about the Fraxidas and what they were actually doing in the dark space, what their goal was, and it very naturally sets up 3.3 and future characters. What actually really surprised me though is that instead of focusing on Hyuki, which I honestly expected, the story shifted more towards Lucilla. What is even more interesting is that Lucilla is not even confirmed for the banner yet, while Hyuki, who is just as mysterious as before, basically came in, aura farmed, and disappeared. But the afterstory focusing on Lucilla actually worked really well, I can add, because it picked up on elements that were already introduced in the main story at the beginning, like the White Rabbit, the dark space, and the idea of a memory type resonators made in Lucilla Hangout. And learning that Lucilla is also a memory type resonator and how dangerous that actually is to the person adds a lot to her character. I have to admit, I was not fan of the Lucilla, and this quest changed it a bit. What I found really interesting is the contrast they created. In the main story we had Sigrika, who represents that young adult face, still learning, still struggling, still trying to prove herself. And I honestly expected Lucilla to go through something similar, to have that moment of doubt and then grow, but instead they did the opposite. Lucilla is already past that stage. She is a fully fledged adult who went through her struggles, who had a difficult past, but came out of it stronger, and she does not have to prove it over and over. To the students, she looks almost untouchable, someone they respect but maybe even fear a little. And when Fraxidas tries to exploit her past through the White Rabbit, it just does not work. She is completely not shaken by all of the schemes. She does not break. She does not need saving from us. That was incredibly refreshing. This is her university, her responsibility, her students, and she stands her ground completely. And I freaking love that. This is how you write strong female characters. Lucilla has her own plan. Her character can deal with their own problem, and Rover is just there to witness and support, not to carry entire narrative. And I also really like how this afterstory still keeps that balance between the closure and teasing what is next. Yes, you get the answers, but at the same time you get those small hints, those little moments that build anticipation, like Hyuki just showing up and disappearing, and everything that is happening with Fraxidas in the background. It does not break the pacing of the main story, but instead keeps you engaged after it ends, speculating who those characters are, what is going next. At the complete end, we finally got to see more of Denia. Instead of giving her some predictable redemption or turning point, they showed something much darker. The fact that she might be just used. It might be seen as disposable. Like, why? What is her role? What are they using her for? And that if she fails, she will be treated the same as the White Rabbit was. And seeing that moment, seeing the actual fear in her, who seemed so confident, that was kind of heartbreaking, not gonna lie. So overall, I think this afterstory structure works really well for Wuthering Waves. It gives you closure, it builds the world, and most importantly, it keeps you excited for what is coming next without dragging the main story too much. I think 3.2 is one of those patches that is not perfect, but it is a very meaningful one. It tried something different. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not. But you could clearly see the direction they're going in and that they're fully committing to the theme they want to work with. And honestly, if they take all of those ideas and just polish them a bit more, we might be getting something really, really special in the future. But of course, I want to know, what do you think, Starlights? Did you enjoy the 3.2 or did it disappoint you? But how do you feel about the direction Wuthering Waves is taking right now, and what would you like to see to get more engaged with the characters, especially if you want to be more engaged with the older characters? And if you enjoy this type of content, remember to subscribe and share the video, and even use the hype if you want, because apparently it helps channel grow. Thank you so much for being here, and as always, stay cozy, stay shiny, and I love you so much, Starlights. Bye!